All right, guys, here we have chapter 3 of The Great Gatsby, and this is the assignment that you should be reading over the weekend. So don't watch this one too early. I'm not actually going to read it all. I'm just going to go through some important things. So we have finally the opportunity to meet Mr. Gatsby. So we've got the picture of wealth. We've got the blue gardens, all of these things, from his neighbor's house. We've got his Rolls Royce. We've got every Friday, 5 crates of oranges and lemons arrived. And every Monday, these same oranges and lemons left in a pyramid of pulpless halves because they have fresh orange juice and lemonade and all of these different things. We have glistening hors d'oeuvres. So these are, or I can't even say it right now. Lovely foods, spiced baked hams, bewitched, forgotten that most of his female guests were too young to know one from the other. Anyway, they've got all these huge parties with so much lavish living and swell with the new arrivals dissolve. It's kind of musical, the party, the way that it goes. We've got, the party has begun, all of these different things. And now this is really where we want to get focused. So he says, I believe that on the first night I went to Gatsby's house, I was one of the few guests who had actually been invited. People were not invited. They went there. They just showed up. They got in automobiles, which bore them out to Long Island, and somehow they ended up at Gatsby's door. And it was almost like an amusement park. But Nick had actually been invited. A chauffeur came over, gave him a little invitation that said, could you come to my little party that night? Turns out it was more than a little party, but it was in Gatsby's majestic hand. So he went over, and everyone was there, all well dressed. And we bump into none other than Jordan Baker. So they get together and hang out sort of through the night. And then she says, I thought you might be here. I remembered you lived next door. And then they went through and da-da-da-da-da. And she just talks about who brought her there and so forth. And now we start to get into some of these rumors about Gatsby, right? So somebody told me they thought he killed someone. He was a German spy. He's in the American army during the war. I'll bet he killed a man. They all looked to see if they could find Gatsby, but they couldn't find him. And no one really had ever met him that had been to these parties, which is really important. Let's see. So no one knows him. We've got all of this. We've got the East Egg people condescending to go to the West Egg because of Gatsby. Let's see. We were going to find the host. I had never met him, she said, and was making me uneasy. The undergraduate nodded in a cynical melancholy. So she leaves her date to go with Nick to find Gatsby. And they walk into a library, paneled with carved English oak, probably transported complete from some ruin overseas. And this is where we meet Owl Eyes, and he becomes a really important figure. A lot of times in literature or in Shakespeare, we have a character who may seem very crazy, but they actually end up being able to see things clearest. And maybe we've talked a little bit about this, but it'll be really important to watch Owl Eyes and think about the things that he talks about. But he's a stout middle-aged man with enormous owl eye spectacles, sitting somewhat drunk on the edge of a great table, staring with unsteady concentration at the shelves of books. He says, What do you think? About what? He waved his hand toward the bookshelves. About that. As a matter of fact, you needn't bother to ascertain. I ascertained. They're real. The books? He nodded. Absolutely real. Have pages and everything. I thought they'd be a nice durable cardboard. Matter of fact, they're absolutely real. Pages and... Here, let me show you. Taking our skepticism for granted, he rushed over to the bookcases and returned with volume 1 of the Stoddard Lectures. See, he cried triumphantly, it's a bona fide piece of printed matter. It fooled me. This fellow's a regular Belasco. It's a triumph. What thoroughness, what realism. Knew when to stop, too. Didn't cut the pages. But what do you want? What do you expect? Now, this is really important. So, Belasco was an American theater producer, and his sets were so lifelike that they were believable, which is suggesting a few things here, that Owl Eyes really understands the fact that Gatsby's putting up a front, a show, right? So think about that raw ivy on the side of the house. Now we have these books. They're real, right? And Owl Eyes expected them to not be real, to just look like books, but they're real books. Now, this is also really funny. He's been drunk for about a week. And he thought he might be able to sober up in the library. So, take that for what it's worth. Okay. Now there's dancing. By midnight, the hilarity had increased, right? So again, these parties, the exorbitance of, just consumption of goods, of time, of, party, of liquor, things like that. So he's still with Jordan Baker, he had taken 2 finger bowls of champagne, and the scene had changed to something significant, elemental, and profound. Now, this is going to get important here. Your face is familiar, he said politely, and the man looked at me, right? Weren't you in the 3rd Division during the war? Why, yes, I was in the 9th Machine Gun Battalion. So this is Nick talking to an unknown gentleman. And the unknown gentleman says, I was in the 7th Infantry until June 1918. I knew I'd seen you somewhere before. We talked for a moment about some wet, gray little villages in France. Evidently, he lived in this vicinity, for he told me that he had just bought a hydroplane and was going to try it out in the morning. Want to go with me, old sport? Old sport's going to become very important. Just near the shore along the Sound. What time? Any time that suits you. And then she says, are you having a good time? Da-da-da-da-da. Then he turned to his new acquaintance and says, this is an unusual party for me. I haven't even seen the host. I live over there. And then this man Gatsby sent over his chauffeur. Da-da-da-da. For a moment, he looked at me as if he failed to understand. I'm Gatsby, he said suddenly. What? Oh, I beg your pardon. So he meets Gatsby, doesn't even realize that he has. But then this is just a great literary moment, right? And it talks about the romanticizing of Gatsby and the way that Nick starts to kind of see him here. He smiled understandingly, much more than understandingly. It was one of those rare smiles with the quality of eternal reassurance in it that you may come across 4 or 5 times in life. It faced, or seemed to face, the whole external world for an instant, and then concentrated on you with an irresistible prejudice in your favor. It understood you just so far as you wanted to be understood, believed in you as you would like to believe in yourself, and assured you that it had precisely the impression of you at your best you hoped to convey. And then it vanished, and then he had to go take a call, and so forth. And then we get another one of the rumors here was that he was an Oxford man, right? So we're not sure if that's true or not. So again, the rumors and how they affect him. And Jordan talks about how she loves big parties because they're so intimate. Small parties, there isn't any privacy. And I wanted to know, what do you think about that? Is that true? And then we have this guy, all of this party, right? We've got all of this going on. Again, just tons. And then the party breaking up and going home. But we still have this lovely moment between Nick and Gatsby. Good night, old sport. So that old sport again, that's how he's going to refer to Nick from now on. And then we have this wreck, and oh my gosh, I'm not going to go into it too much, but it's so funny. He says, see, it went into the ditch, and they're like, well, yeah. And it turns out it's owl eyes, and how did it happen? He goes, I don't know. I don't know anything about mechanics, but how did it happen? Did you run into the wall? Don't ask me. Washing his hands of the whole matter, which is a biblical allusion. I know very little about driving, next to nothing. It happened, that's all I know. Well, if you're a poor driver, you ought not to drive. But I wasn't even trying. And it turns out he wasn't actually driving the car, but they all thought that he was, so... but his chauffeur is drunk. Then the wheels come off, and we have all of these different problems. So they try to keep driving, but they can't because the wheel's gone. And it just, crazy, just craziness. And this is a nice little aside that we get from Nick to us as the reader. He says, reading over what I've written so far, I see I have given the impression that the events of 3 nights several weeks apart were all that absorbed me. On the contrary, they were merely casual events in a crowded summer, and until much later they absorbed me infinitely less than my personal affairs. Most of the time I worked, and most of the time he, did just normal things. He went to the Yale Club. Occasionally he saw Jordan, right? But this Hall makes it seem like all he did were these other little things. So I began to like New York, the racy, adventurous feel, and so forth. And he just talks about, some of this. And And this is important. We get a little picture into Jordan here. She's incurably dishonest. But she keeps that cool, insolent smile, turned to the world, yet satisfy the demands of her hard, jaunty body. So then he remembers the story a little bit later, but she says people need to be careful. She's not careful, so other people need to be careful. She said, I hate careless people. That's why I like you. So she's careless, but she hates careless people, but she likes Nick because he's not careless. And then in that moment, he thought he loved her. Okay, let's see. We find out that she was dishonest and she had actually cheated and different things, right? But this is really important right here. He says, everyone suspects himself of at least one of the cardinal virtues, and those are good things. You want to have those. And this is mine. I'm one of the few honest people that I have ever known, which again is important because as our narrator, we want to be able to trust him. All right, guys, have a great weekend, and I hope that you will be ready for your quiz.